Andrew Jackson, one of the nation's most fearless leaders in military service and 7th President of the United States. How did Andrew Jackson rise from poverty to take the most powerful position in the world? Andrew Jackson was born on March 15, 1767, in the Waxhaw settlement located on the border of North Carolina and South Carolina. Jackson was the son of 2 Irish immigrants. Jackson's childhood revolved around the Revolutionary War. The war had cost him his whole family. His brother died while fighting in an enlisted Patriot regiment. At the age of 13, Jackson and his other brother had already volunteered to fight the British with American irregulars, as they were too young to receive formal soldiering. His brother and himself were eventually captured by the British and used as slave labor. While captured, Andrew and his brother contracted smallpox. His brother died from the disease. Around the same time as Jackson's capture, his mother had fallen ill and died. Jackson was an orphan by the age of 15. Jackson earned the title the Brave Boy of the Waxhaws while he was under British control. When an officer ordered Jackson to clean his boots, Jackson refused. The officer struck Jackson with a sword as punishment for his refusal. This behavior foreshadows the character that Jackson came to be during his later military career and presidency. During the War of 1812, Andrew Jackson gained plenty of popularity. After winning major battles, Andrew Jackson was promoted to general in the United States Army. With Jackson's promotion, he would go on to command Tennessee, Mississippi, and Louisiana. In 1814, Jackson had a long string of success in his areas of responsibility. Still bitter from the Revolutionary War, Jackson was thirsty for revenge against the British. During the summer of 1814, Jackson led several battles against the British, starting in Alabama and moving south toward Florida. In December, the Brits were sailing toward New Orleans. Jackson was hot on their tail with a small party of troops to fight the British and to accomplish his most famous victory as a general. In 1813, the Creek Indians were killing hundreds of white settlers in what was then Mississippi Territory. This was due to the fact that they had stolen land from the natives during the war. Andrew Jackson had a small Tennessee and Kentucky militia to work with. He was able to confront the Indians and was able to defeat them, though his odds of victory were not favorable. One of Jackson's famous battles took place at Topeka, also known as Horseshoe Bend. On March 27, 1814, Jackson's militia killed over 800 Creek Indians and captured 500 women and children. These actions made Andrew Jackson more popular. His actions were ruthless, but at the time, many would say they were justified. After the battle, the Creeks would never threaten the frontier again. In August, an agreement called the Treaty of Fort Jackson would be signed. In the treaty, the Creeks would surrender and forfeit 23 million acres of their land. The War of 1812 ended with the signing of the Treaty of Ghent. It was signed by American and British representatives in Belgium. According to the terms of the treaty, all conquered territory that occurred during the war would be returned, and that there would be commissions to settle the boundaries on the United States and Canadian borders. Unfortunately, news did not travel very fast in 1814. The British forces that were stationed on the Mississippi River were not informed of the contract until 2 months later. 2 weeks after the treaty signing, British troops attacked the city of New Orleans. Luckily, America's favorite general, Andrew Jackson, was there to put an end to it. Despite having an army of only untrained volunteers consisting of freed slaves and Kentucky riflemen and being outnumbered 2-1. For days, Jackson's militia waited in a barrier dug into the earth for an opportunity to attack the British. Eventually, the British charged the underdog militia were promptly stopped. It was a triumphant victory for the U.S. and the general. News soon spread to the American population about the victory against the Brits around the same time as the Treaty of Ghent. Naturally, Americans thought these two were related and sparks pride in their country, and General Jackson was idolized even more than before. This will play out well for Jackson come his presidential campaign. In 1818, General Jackson was informed the Seminoles were congregating in large masses near Pensacola, Florida. At the time, This area was under Spanish control. The Seminoles were viewed as a threat by Americans at this time. There were reports of Indians killing white Americans in Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. Jackson was already located in Fort Scott and decided it was necessary to take action against the aggression by invading the Spanish territory and killing the Indians that were gathered in Pensacola. Jackson claimed that he did not wish to expand U.S. territory, but to prevent further violence on the American people. On February 22, 1819, Spain forfeited their Florida territory to the United States on the condition that the U.S. would assume $5 million of Spain's debt. When Andrew Jackson entered the White House, politics changed as Americans knew it. Andrew Jackson first ran for president in 1824 and won the popular vote. However, he did not get support from the majority of the Electoral College. This cost him the presidency. The House of Representatives decided the next candidate and chose John Quincy Adams as the next president of the United States. Jackson was not discouraged by this misfortune. In 1828, Jackson ran a campaign with more participation from the common people than ever before and took the presidency. His inauguration was attended by masses of people, the first of its kind. At the time, Jackson was the first president to invite the public to his inauguration ball hosted at the White House. The party was rambunctious and many things were broken during the celebration, but this humble act earned more respect with the common man. Jackson was known as the common man's president. Aside from his true interest in his citizens, he was respected in other ways as well. He was relatable as a person, coming from poverty and the first president to come from the frontier. He was somewhat of an idol to many of the population, especially in his local area. Jackson's presidency began a turning point in American politics. The introduction of modern-day Democratic Party was formed after his election. Jackson would change the position of the president forever with his new style of leadership. Andrew Jackson was compared to a king with his liberal use of vetoes and new additions and changes to policy without passing through Congress. Americans that opposed him referred to him as King Andrew. Not so ironically, Jackson's first address to Congress included his proposal to remove the Electoral College. One of Jackson's most controversial vetoes was used to remove all of the funds from the Bank of the United States. Jackson saw what he believed to be corrupt capitalism revolving around the bank and thought that it took a toll on the majority of the people while benefiting only few. During Jackson's presidency, there was plenty of conflict with the Native Americans. Georgia, in particular, was a main factor with the Indians in a turf war. A Supreme Court case ruling between the Cherokee tribe and Georgia ordered that Georgia may not take any further land from the natives, but the state disobeyed. There was no consequence for the behavior, and President Jackson turned a blind eye to the situation. This resulted poorly for the natives. The Trail of Tears occurred after Andrew Jackson's reign, but still occurred due to politics that took place while he was in office. The Trail of Tears was responsible for the death of thousands of natives while the Army escorted 16,000 Cherokee Indians to Oklahoma. Drama arose in 1833 when South Carolina had refused to pay federal tax. It was known as the Tariff of Abominations. South Carolina saw the tariff as an unjust and unconstitutional. This caused tension not only between the United States and South Carolina, but between Andrew Jackson and his own vice president, John C. Calhoun. Calhoun, being from South Carolina, agreed that the state should be exempt from the tax, while Andrew Jackson did not. Calhoun resigned from the vice president position to join the Senate in hopes to correct the issue. In March 1833, Congress passed the Force Bill, which would enable Andrew Jackson to use military force on South Carolina as a repercussion for not paying their taxes. Congress passed an additional bill that would take some of the burden off of South Carolina so that they would actually pay. Once it was made clear that the state would be paying the owed tariffs, Jackson revoked the Force Bill as a kind gesture. This may be the most compassionate act Andrew Jackson made during his presidency. Many white Americans wanted the Native Americans relocated from the eastern states. the people relied on Andrew Jackson to solve their problems. In 1830, President Jackson pushed the Indian Removal Act through Congress. Andrew Jackson argued that this would be a positive change for the Native Americans. He claimed that Indians could preserve their culture and give them plenty of separation from this American legal system. Though many tribes decided to relocate to west of the Mississippi, others refused. The Seminoles were one of the last tribes to relocate after losing a second Seminole War. Many of Andrew Jackson's ideologies still live on today. Not surprisingly, they are still quite controversial. Examples such as overuse of executive power through today's vetoes, are more modern executive orders, and mass deportations. Many struggles that we faced during the Jacksonian era are still relevant today and quite comparable. Jackson made vetoes very popular. His most famous act of executive power was his extermination of the Second Bank of the United States. While Jackson only made 12 vetoes in total, he changed the game for future presidents. Some presidents' rejections go into the hundreds, with Franklin Roosevelt on top with a total of 635. Jackson did not have any executive orders, only because they were non-existent until 1907. His actions as president may have played a role in their eventual creation. His stubborn acts to gain territory from natives may have been a little less gray if he had the legal power to do so, but in the end, Jackson found a way. Another example of Jackson's vision that still applied after his reign was his vision of the United States expansion, including the movement of Native Americans. United States territory continued to grow pretty consistently up until the 1950s, while simultaneously putting Indians on reservations. His policies could also be compared to mass deportations of illegal immigrants. While immigrating here illegally is in fact illegal, there are still plenty of controversy surrounding the issue. Is removing somebody from their home a violation of human rights? Jackson's presidency, while controversial, was still a major stepping stone in forming the United States that we know today. Without Jackson's policies and aggressive behavior as both a general and a president, the United States would not be the large and prosperous land as we know it.